She always believed that their love was strong and their marriage honest. But after Carl Whitmore's death, Alice discovered a truth he never spoke of, a past buried in war, a letter that changed everything, and a search for answers that could rewrite the story they thought they knew. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're tuning in from today, and if you believe in the power of love and compassion, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. She had lost Carl just a few months earlier, and for Alice the world had stopped. They had been married for almost 50 years, a partnership built on steady devotion rather than flamboyant passions. Carl was the type who favored neat corners and labeled drawers. He rose at the same time each morning, dressing quietly, making 2 cups of coffee, though she usually only drank half of hers. He relished routines, always folding the newspaper the same way. She took comfort in his predictability, his unflappable calm. Yet beneath that composed exterior, she sometimes glimpsed an unspoken ache in his eyes. She'd caught him awake in the middle of the night more than once, staring out the window as though searching for something far away. When she asked, he would offer a subdued smile, say it was nothing, and steer the conversation back to their everyday life. Groceries, local news, the grandchildren's antics. She believed his story wholeheartedly. That he'd served in the U.S. Army Signal Corps, stationed in various safe postings during the Cold War, primarily handling routine communications. It was just communications gear, cables and signals. Boring, he would say in his mild, self-deprecating tone. She never pressed him for details, respecting that perhaps it wasn't all that interesting, or maybe it was overshadowed by the rest of their lives spent building a home, raising 2 children, and eventually spoiling grandchildren. When Carl passed, cancer swift and merciless, Alice was left to sort through his things. She intended to compile a small memoir for the family, a record of Carl's life to share with future generations. He had always been somewhat private, but she assumed his official records would fill in the small gaps. So she began collecting documents. Old pay stubs, tax returns, even scanning the diaries he kept in his retirement. One day, she laid them all out chronologically on the dining room table, forming a timeline from the late 1940s up to his death. Everything seemed neat, consistent with the Carl she knew, until she reached 1962. It was as though that entire year had disappeared. The neat line of continuity just dropped off from January 1962 to January 1963, then resumed without explanation. No medical forms, no bank statements, no references in his diaries from that period. At first, she figured it was a simple oversight or a lost folder. But a creeping sense of unease took hold. She found it impossible to ignore the sense that something was missing. She wrote a letter to the Veterans Affairs Office, providing Carl's service details, expecting them to confirm he was indeed stationed with the Signal Corps in 1962. The reply arrived a week later and left her breathless with confusion. They had no record of Carl Whitmore serving active duty that year. The letter asked if she was certain of the name and the date. Alice felt her heart skip. She double-checked. Yes, Carl's official Army period was 1960 to 1964. That covered 1962. Yet the office insisted they had 0 documentation for those months. Something was amiss. She tried brushing it off as a bureaucratic glitch, but the more she thought about it, the more the issue gnawed at her. How could an entire year vanish from Carl's record? She called the number listed in the letter, spent an hour talking to a polite representative who simply repeated that they had no documentation. The rep suggested maybe he was on extended leave or transferred to a special project that was never properly filed. The rep sounded perplexed as well. Alice felt a slow dread settling in her stomach. This was not a mere error. Something was deliberately missing. She reached out to Colonel Edwin Marsh, a name she recalled from Carl's old Christmas card list. Colonel Marsh, living in a retirement community in Arizona, responded warmly to her phone call, expressing condolences for Carl's passing. Marsh remembered Carl fondly, praising his calm competence, particularly with encryption and radio equipment. But when Alice asked about 1962, a tension crept into Marsh's tone. Carl never spoke about that year, Marsh said quietly. He couldn't. It was safer for him, and for you if he didn't. That cryptic statement made Alice's blood run cold. She pressed Marsh for more, but he apologized and said it was not his place to reveal. I only know bits and pieces, and I'm not sure I even have the facts straight. Carl was a good man. But that year, well, it changed him. Alice hung up feeling betrayed. She had known Carl nearly half a century, yet apparently a whole chapter of his life was walled off. She wondered if their marriage was based on illusions. She felt anger flare. How could he keep such a secret? She felt heartbreak, too, that he had lived with something so consequential that he never trusted her with it. Over the next weeks, she asked questions in every possible direction, from old friends to acquaintances who might recall something about Carl's postings. She found no answers, only shrugs or blank stares. People remembered him as the quiet radio guy, who kept equipment running, who traveled occasionally but never boasted. Some mentioned he had an aptitude for languages, especially Russian. Others said they never suspected anything beyond standard army service. Dead ends everywhere. Eventually, after many attempts, she managed to glean a shred of information from a contact in an intelligence-related agency. That led to a thin envelope arriving at her door. CIA materials, heavily redacted. She recognized her name typed as the requester, but the actual text was mostly blacked out. The handful of readable lines mentioned that Carl had been reassigned to Berlin, early 1962, that an asset was burned, that Carl's status was listed inactive, and no further deployment was recorded. The word burned leapt out at her, a term she'd only encountered in spy novels, someone compromised or exposed. This was not the Carl she knew. Her mild-mannered husband, entangled in such dangerous affairs? The partial file was stark in its brevity. She stared at it for hours, her mind swirling with images of secret missions, betrayals, desperate acts in a divided Berlin. She recalled Carl's mention of passing through Germany once, but he'd painted it as a short training stint. She realized now that it might have been so much more. The discovery rattled her, yet it also kindled a fierce determination. She had spent her married life respecting Carl's boundaries, letting him lead. Now, with him gone, she refused to be shut out from the truth. She decided to go to Berlin herself to see if any records might confirm what happened in 1962. Traveling alone to a foreign country in her mid-70s felt daunting. But she planned meticulously, booking a modest hotel near the city center, practicing basic German phrases, and collecting any documents that might help. The partial CIA memo, a copy of Carl's old army discharge papers, and a small envelope of photographs from that era. She also had a short letter from Colonel Marsh offering a coded hint about might find answers in old Stasi archives. She wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that, but she guessed that East German secret police, the Stasi, might have records relating to espionage or infiltration in early 1962. Upon arrival in Berlin, the city's bustle overwhelmed her at first. She had read about the glamorous capital, but also the war scars that lingered in architecture and memory. She checked into her hotel, tried to orient herself with a map. The next morning, she ventured to the Federal Archives, mustering her courage. Bureaucracy greeted her at every turn, staff either uninterested or politely unhelpful. She tried referencing Carl's name, showing them the redacted CIA file, but they gave her formal rejections. She felt near tears at the stone-faced responses. She roamed the building's corridors, feeling small and invisible. By sheer chance, a young researcher named Jonas overheard her attempts and approached, speaking softly in halting English. "I might help you, though I can't promise much," he said. "We have some old Stasi files, but access is tricky. Let me see what I can do." That spark of kindness buoyed her spirits. She waited in a quiet reading room while Jonas disappeared. The hours dragged, punctuated by the gentle hum of overhead lights, the shuffle of archivists retrieving documents. At last, Jonas returned with a slim file. His expression was serious. "It's from 1962, labeled with references to an American communications specialist. The name is half blacked out, but the partial matches C. Wit, that might be your husband." Alice's heart pounded. She followed him to a small desk, where he laid the file carefully. Inside were black and white photographs, slightly grainy. One depicted a man who looked exactly like Karl, though younger, standing in a dreary Berlin street. Another shot showed him with a short, dark-haired woman labeled Marigold in German script below. The note described her as a Soviet operative or informant passing intelligence about nuclear movements. The text was mostly in German, but Jonas skimmed it for her. It says that this American connected with Marigold to exchange coded materials. The operation fell under high suspicion. The man was believed compromised. Alice felt a jolt of shock. She recognized the stoic set of Karl's shoulders in that photograph, the determined brow. He wore an overcoat, his hands deep in the pockets, as though guarding something. Another photo showed the two of them on a bridge, the East Berlin skyline faint behind them. Jonas explained that Marigold was a code name, possibly for a Soviet defector or double agent. The file ended abruptly, referencing an infiltration scandal that left one operative missing. The date was mid-November 1962. Then a stamp, "Asset burned." The same phrase from the CIA memo. So this was the moment that spelled the end for Karl's secret operation, whatever it was. Jonas quietly closed the folder, his eyes reflecting sympathy. "I see these stories sometimes," he told Alice. Berlin was a powder keg then, especially around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Nuclear tensions soared. People in espionage roles risked everything. Some got out, some didn't. Alice left the archives, her mind reeling. Karl had not only gone missing in the records for a year, he had evidently worked with a Soviet contact named Marigold, carrying out high-stakes courier missions involving nuclear intelligence. The idea clashed violently with her memories of him carefully folding laundry or calmly fixing squeaky doors. She recalled glimpses of restlessness in him, though the hush that fell when old war movies played. She realized he had carried this entire secret life behind his mild manner. She set out to see what more she could glean about Marigold. Over the next days, Jonas tried to help, but the archives offered little else. Some references suggested that Marigold's real name was Elena, or Elena Markova, but details were elusive. The rumor was that she vanished in 1962 after a compromised exchange, possibly executed by the Soviets for betrayal, or smuggled out by Western intelligence. No official record spelled out which. Another rumor implied that Karl had orchestrated her final extraction but at great personal cost. Alice recognized that the cost might have been an entire year of his life scrubbed from the record, or some forced inactivity when he was labeled burned. She returned to the hotel each night exhausted, her emotions swinging between anger at Karl for never telling her, fear for what he might have endured, and sorrow that he had been so alone in his burdens. She tried calling Colonel Marsh again, but he repeated that he couldn't reveal more. He only said that if Karl had been involved with Marigold, it meant that he had to choose between saving her or saving himself. That choice apparently led to the near erasure of his official identity for that year. "He paid a heavy price," Marsh said gently. "Don't judge him too harshly." Alice pressed on. She scoured local libraries for references to any hints about defection networks in the early 1960s. She found mention of hush-hush safehouse operators, coded phone lines, and staged accidents to slip people from east to west. She pictured Karl in the thick of it, forging credentials, passing secret notes, all the while telling her it was just cables and signals. The betrayal stung, but so did the realization that he likely hid it to keep her safe. She felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak. She only wished he had trusted her enough to share. One evening, flipping through a battered photo album in her Berlin hotel, she found a small folded note she had overlooked before. It was stuffed behind a loose plastic pocket, presumably something Karl had hidden years ago. The note was in typed German, referencing an extraction route changed last minute, a self-compromise to ensure the target's survival, and a phrase scrawled in Karl's handwriting, "I had to give up my exit for hers." She read it again and again, tears welling, seeing the magnitude of his sacrifice. Marigold or Elena had needed to get out more than he did. He must have orchestrated a switch that allowed her to slip away, at the cost of his own cover being blown. That explained Asset Burned and the vanishing year. In the thick of these revelations, she decided there was only one recourse left. She had read that sometimes the old East German secret police files contained personal correspondences. Jonas had found references to Elena's possible name. Maybe Elena was still alive. Maybe someone else from that operation was. With trembling resolve, Alice placed a discreet advertisement in a German newspaper, using the coded references M62 and Marigold. She left her hotel phone number, hoping it might catch the attention of any surviving contact. It was a long shot, but she felt compelled. Jonas gently warned her it could attract con artists or unscrupulous types. She nodded, acknowledging the risk. She was too close to the truth to turn back. Days passed, the phone in her hotel room silent. Then, on the 5th morning, it rang. A cautious voice in lightly accented English introduced himself as a friend of someone connected to Elena. He asked why she was searching. Alice explained simply that her husband had been the courier who changed the extraction route. The man paused, then said he would pass the message to Elena. No promises. Then he hung up. Alice's hands shook as she cradled the phone. She realized this might be the final connection to Karl's hidden year. Time slipped by without further calls. She lingered in Berlin, torn between hope and the futility of waiting. She considered returning home to the States, but a part of her believed she needed to stay just a bit longer. On a chilly afternoon, the hotel desk clerk approached her while she sipped coffee in the lounge, holding out a note. A call from a woman named Elena. She says to meet tomorrow at a cafe near the Charlottenburg district. Alice's heart fluttered. She was about to meet the mysterious Marigold, the woman her husband had risked everything to save. She arrived the next day at the small cafe, wearing her warm coat. She recognized no one at first. Then she spotted an older woman sitting alone by the window, hair streaked with silver, face etched by time. The woman lifted her gaze, eyes revealing caution and sorrow. Tentatively, Alice approached, asked, "Elena?" The woman nodded. They studied each other in silence before Elena gestured for Alice to sit. She spoke quietly in English, heavily accented. "So you are Karl's wife. I owe him everything. But I never thought I would meet you." They ordered tea, the tension thick. Elena explained how in the early 1960s, she had worked within a Soviet intelligence circle, gleaning critical nuclear secrets. She grew disillusioned with the regime. She provided information to the West, hoping to prevent catastrophic miscalculations. Then the Soviets discovered a mole. She was Marigold, a code name assigned by Western handlers. Karl was assigned as her courier, though only briefly. She recounted the night of their final handoff. "We were set to exchange documents and slip me out, but the plan was compromised. The Soviets were closing in. Karl made a last-minute switch that allowed me to cross a checkpoint undiscovered while he was left behind, effectively sacrificing his anonymity. After that, I heard rumors he was recalled or labeled burned. I assumed he might vanish or face discipline from his own side. But he never told me exactly what happened. I never saw him again. Until now, I only had guesses that he survived." Alice felt tears. She pictured Karl in the freezing Berlin cold, letting Elena slip away to safety, knowing it meant burning his own identity. He gave up a year of his life, scrubbing it from the records, to ensure Elena's chance at freedom. That was the cost. "He never spoke of it to me," Alice said softly, voice trembling. "He carried that year as a blank slate in all his paperwork. I found out only after he died." Elena's eyes glistened. "He was a kind man, determined and calm. Even in that chaos, he reassured me it would be okay. He gave me the forged papers. Then he pretended to follow, but I realized too late he was stalling, drawing attention away from me. By the time I found refuge, I knew he must have been compromised. I tried once or twice to inquire about him, but it was too risky. I believed he'd chosen that path knowingly. For me." She paused, tears slipping silently. "I am sorry he's gone. I had hoped maybe he found happiness after such sacrifice." Alice nodded, tears matching Elena's. She realized Karl had indeed found happiness. A quiet life with a wife who adored him, children, and eventually grandchildren, all the while carrying this secret. She tried to quell the stab of jealousy she felt toward Elena, a woman who had received Carl's ultimate devotion in that moment. But it was overshadowed by gratitude. She said, "Thank you for telling me. I needed to understand why he kept that year so private." Elena nodded. "He never wanted you to worry, and he was protecting me too. If it became known, I might still be hunted by old enemies." The weight of that statement sank in. Decades had passed, but old resentments lingered in certain circles. They spoke for hours, exchanging details. Elena recounted how she lived under a new identity for a time, eventually settling in Dresden after the wall fell. She taught languages, built a modest life, always looking over her shoulder. She married once but divorced. She had no children. "That life never fit me after all I'd been through," she said. She ended by pressing a small black and white photo into Alice's hand. It showed Carl and Elena in 1962, standing near a graffiti-laden wall. The photo was blurred at the edges, but Carl's face was unmistakable, serious, protective. On the back, Elena had written in Russian a line that translated to, "He vanished so I could live." Alice's tears brimmed anew. She realized she was holding a piece of her husband's missing year captured in tangible form. The next morning, Alice and Elena parted. They stood outside the cafe, a chill wind blowing. Elena said, "I have grandchildren who know nothing of my past. I want it that way, but I wanted you to know your husband was my savior. I can't repay that." Alice took her hand gently. "You repay it by living freely." That was his wish. They embraced with tears, forging a quiet bond before Elena slipped away. Alice was left with the photograph and a profound sense of closure. Now she understood the cost. Carl gave up not just that year in the official record, but also a slice of his own innocence, all to ensure another's survival. Returning to the United States felt surreal. She had begun her journey reeling from confusion and suspicion, but now she returned with reverence for Carl's hidden courage. She visited Colonel Marsh in Arizona, hoping to share what she'd learned. He listened, expression solemn. "That aligns with what I suspected," he murmured. "Carl never confirmed it to me directly, but I figured it was something like that." He asked if she felt anger or pride. She admitted to feeling both, but mostly pride. "He gave so much of himself to a cause he believed in," she said softly. Marsh nodded, adding that though many men boasted of war stories, Carl was different. He carried his secrets in silence, believing it safer for everyone. Back home, Alice decided how to incorporate the events of 1962 into the family memoir. She realized she didn't want to reveal every detail to the grandchildren. Some of them were too young to appreciate the moral complexities. Instead, she wrote a short, poetic entry for that year. He was gone, but not lost. He returned changed, bearing quiet burdens we'll never fully know. She included a single snapshot of the Berlin street, uncaptioned, letting it speak silently. She believed that one day, if they read deeper, they might discover the truth she uncovered. But for now, it sufficed that the memory of Carl be honored. Her own private recollection she recorded in a separate document, describing Elena, the last-minute switched route, the asset burned status. She slid that document into a sealed envelope labeled, "For the family, if they seek deeper answers." She placed it in a safe deposit box, wanting the choice to be theirs. She took the photograph Elena had given her and gently taped it in her personal scrapbook, next to a picture of Carl from their wedding day. The two images of him, a beaming groom at 22 and a steeled operative at 24, struck her. They were the same man, but shaped by unimaginable experiences. In the months that followed, she found peace settling in her life. At times, a pang of regret surfaced, that Carl never trusted her enough to share. But she reminded herself that perhaps he was bound by classified obligations or personal guilt, and that he had chosen to guard her from potential danger. She recalled how Colonel Marsh warned that knowledge could place her at risk. She realized that might have been part of Carl's reasoning, too. The more she reflected, the more she forgave him. She loved him for the life they shared and for the quiet sacrifice he made before that life even began. She returned to daily tasks with renewed purpose, volunteering at a local library, tending the small garden Carl once managed. She pruned the rose bushes with careful dedication, recalling how Carl would measure the fertilizer precisely. She laughed to herself, remembering how he labeled each tool. She recognized these small details as echoes of his methodical mind, a mind that had once orchestrated cunning ruses and complicated signals in the Cold War. She found herself smiling through tears at the duality of it all. One day, she gathered the courage to show the photograph of Carl and Elena to her adult daughter, Catherine. She offered a gentle summary of how Carl, in 1962, had helped a woman escape in Berlin. Catherine's eyes widened, filling with both surprise and admiration. "Dad was a spy?" she asked, voice tinged with a childlike awe. Alice corrected her softly, explaining that he was more a courier, an unsung hero. Catherine grew quiet. "All this time we never knew," she murmured. She asked if it changed how Alice viewed Carl. Alice paused, then said, "He's still the man who taught you to ride a bike, who insisted on finishing your math homework properly. That remains. But now I also see he had the courage to risk everything for a stranger. That's profound." Catherine nodded, tears brimming. They embraced, forging a deeper bond. Catherine later confided that she felt proud and sad in equal measure. Not all reactions in the family were so supportive. Her son, Michael, was unsettled, worried about potential repercussions if the truth came out. "What if some old Soviet diehards come after us?" he half joked, half feared. Alice tried to reassure him that half a century had passed, that Elena was living quietly. Still, Michael asked if it might be safer to keep it all under wraps. This led to some tension between them. Michael believed certain secrets should remain buried, but Catherine felt the story deserved to be honored. Alice tried to mediate, reminding them that Carl had never broadcast his secrets, so perhaps they needed to maintain that discretion while still preserving the legacy. Over a few dinners, they reached a tentative understanding. They would not publicly share the details, but they would let the grandchildren sense that Carl had a lost chapter that shaped him. The siblings parted, still somewhat uneasy, but with mutual respect. Meanwhile, Catherine dealt with her own subplot of personal struggle, a health scare. A lump in her breast required a biopsy. During that stressful period, Alice stayed close, supporting her. Catherine faced the ordeal with surprising resilience, drawing on the newfound sense that her father overcame hidden trials. She told Alice, "If Dad could face that kind of danger, I can handle a medical scare." The biopsy turned out benign, and mother and daughter emerged with a deeper sense of gratitude for the legacy of courage Carl had quietly passed on. While the family navigated these emotional terrains, Alice found small references continuing to surface about the events in Berlin. Jonas, the researcher from the Berlin archives, emailed her occasionally with tidbits. He uncovered mention of a code name for Carl in an Old West German intelligence memo, Greyhawk. Alice almost laughed, picturing how that would amuse Carl, who was so unassuming. Another note implied there had been a near meltdown among American intelligence circles when Carl's identity was compromised. "One asset for another," the file commented. Possibly the trade was that Carl surrendered his future operational role in exchange for Marigold's safe extraction. The hush around that arrangement had effectively erased him from official service for that year. She thanked Jonas for each snippet, marveling at how the puzzle now felt complete. As the anniversaries of Carl's death approached, Alice found a gentle calm overshadowing the sadness. She had the knowledge that, while he might have withheld the specifics, he had loved her enough to shape their life in quiet devotion after living through that harrowing year. She visited his grave more regularly, placing fresh daisies or small flags, sometimes leaving a note referencing a memory. On one visit, she set down a small black and white copy of the Berlin photograph. "I know what you did," she whispered, "and I understand. Thank you." The breeze carried her voice over the neatly trimmed grass, and she imagined him at peace, unburdened by the secrets he could no longer carry. She also wrote to Elena one final time. She sent a short letter in English, sealed with care, addressed to the discreet mailbox Elena had given her. In it, she expressed gratitude for sharing the story, for releasing Carl from the burden of invisibility. She included a small snapshot of Carl in his later years, holding a grandchild. She wrote, "This is the man your sacrifice allowed him to become. A father, a grandfather, a gentle soul who cherished every day of normal life." Then she slipped the letter into an envelope, not expecting a reply. Weeks later, she received a single postcard from Dresden with no return address, showing a scenic view of a river. The message read, "He is remembered. Thank you for letting me see who he became." Alice smiled at the subtle closure. Thus, as time unfurled, the sting of betrayal turned into reverence. The missing year no longer felt like a dark hole in Carl's story, but rather a testament to how far he would go to save someone in danger. She found herself mending a rift she never knew existed, forging a deeper posthumous bond with him. In the final draft of the family memoir, she wrote a measured explanation for 1962. He stepped off the map, for reasons that tested his resolve and changed him. We respect his silence, knowing it guarded lives and set him on a path of quiet loyalty. The rest of the memoir recounted their marriage, the children's births, the everyday joys, so that the entire tapestry felt balanced. She held a small gathering for close friends and family when she finished the memoir's first printed version. They toasted Carl's memory in the backyard where he once cultivated tomatoes and cucumbers, and Alice read a short excerpt from the 1962 entry, carefully omitting references that might endanger Elena or others. Sincerity resonated in her voice as she read, "He gave up what he could not keep, to protect what he believed in." Afterward, a hush fell, and she sensed that everyone felt a bit more connected to Carl's spirit. Life settled into a gentle new normal. Alice maintained her volunteering, occasionally offering a listening ear to those in crisis. She recognized parallels between the hidden pain of those she met and the hidden burdens Carl carried. She found that sharing small pieces of her own journey might comfort them. "Sometimes we never know the battles our loved ones fought," she would say, "but it doesn't diminish the love they gave us daily." People listened, touched by her perspective. A quiet wisdom emerged in her, shaped by the knowledge that secrets, however painful, can stem from acts of love and courage. Eventually, Catherine and Michael each read the sealed letter containing the deeper truths, with Alice's blessing. They approached her with tears and amazement. Catherine said she was proud to descend from a line of hidden heroes, while Michael admitted he felt uneasy knowing their father had risked so much. Yet both expressed gratitude that they finally understood the significance of that missing year. It became a turning point in their own personal growth. Michael, who always strove for security and control, began to appreciate the necessity of risk in forging a better world. Catherine, who once worried about following rules too strictly, learned that sometimes moral imperatives override official constraints. They each integrated the revelations in their own ways. In the end, the final portion of the memoir read like a tribute not just to Carl but to the complexities of love itself. Alice wrote of how true intimacy often involves trusting that some secrets are held for protective reasons, not out of malice. She repeated the phrase, "He wasn't lost that year, he was becoming who he needed to be," as a conclusion to the 1962 section. And in the personal epilogue, she described the day Carl returned home in January 1963 with a tightness around his eyes, never speaking of what he endured but devoting himself wholeheartedly to the quiet life they built together. She realized that for him, that was the best gift he could give: normalcy, routine, the daily comforts that anchored them. On the anniversary of Carl's passing, Alice went once again to his grave, carrying a single envelope. Inside was a final letter she had composed, acknowledging the entire secret. She read it aloud in a trembling voice, recounting how she discovered the missing year, how she traveled to Berlin, how she met Elena, how she forgave him, and how she loved him even more for the sacrifice he made. Then she tucked the letter beside the flowers, whispering, "Rest, my love. The world you feared might unravel your secret is at peace now. And so am I." She felt a calm settle over her heart. In that moment, she sensed the last echoes of bitterness lift away, replaced by gratitude. She had come full circle, from a widow baffled by missing records to a woman who recognized that Carl's hidden year was the linchpin of his moral compass. The legacy of that sacrifice now belonged to her as well, and she carried it with dignity. Standing by the headstone, she closed her eyes, letting the breeze carry a promise. She would ensure that the quiet heroism of men like Carl, men who served in the shadows, would live on in the memories of those who loved them. She would not let that year remain empty in the story of his life. She had filled it with truth, sorrow, and respect. Thank you for watching to the end. If you found this story meaningful, please like and subscribe for more.